Dr. Jeffrey Halstead has been Canandaigua's hometown dentist for more than 35 years, offering routine dental care as well as cosmetic dentistry, implants, and dentures by their highly trained and experienced staff. Visit them online at canandaiguadentistry.com or find them on Facebook and Instagram.
Do you want to know what's happening in the Finger Lakes? We do too. We're going in depth with decision makers in the heart of upstate New York to get the answers you need. From the team of FingerLakes1.com, this is Inside the FLX.
How do small businesses compete with large corporations? That question has been asked repeatedly by readers, and while I've wanted to build an episode of the podcast around it, finding willing participants has been a challenge. Until recently, I sat down with Christine Van Duzen a couple weeks ago to talk about that very question and a lot more. We talked about small business owners' caution when it comes to conversations like this one, and the strategy when you're running a small business competing with major brands for the same finite number of customers. It's hard work, but talking with Christine was refreshing for a lot of reasons because her business, Blush by CV Designs, has not only succeeded in spite of corporate competition, but thrived. Not only that, she's still very optimistic that other people, namely entrepreneurs just starting out, can do it too. For those who don't know, can you give us a little bit of like your origin story in small business? Were you an entrepreneur before your current endeavor, which has been going on for many years, as we just were talking, or was this your first attempt?
Well, I mean, the truth is I was kind of flailing a little bit before. I was in my 20s. I did the college thing. Wasn't a great fit, kind of bounced around a little bit for that, came back and I was like, you know what? I just want to work. I just want to get an apartment and I want to work. So I started and I worked with some attorneys and then I decided, oh, you can't make money to survive without some kind of credentials. So I went and I was taking child psychology classes and I wanted to be a school psychologist. So I started working as a secretary in the Seneca Falls School District while going to school. And during that time, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition and had a couple dozen surgeries. And long story short, I was told, you know, you're just going to have to go on disability because there's no way you're going to be able to work full time. And I had, during this time, I was missing some days at the school and it was just a lot. And so I left the job at the school and I was like, absolutely not. Am I going on disability in my mid-20s? Like, no, I'll lose my mind. So Brad, my husband, had rented a photo studio actually in this building on the first floor. And there was like a big space in the front. And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with that room. And I'm like, well, I make jewelry. I don't know. Maybe I'll just start selling that and I'll add like some accessories or something. So I did that. And that just kind of led to, I can't believe people even showed up here in this building. It's so like off the beaten path and random, but people came and within 6 or 8 months, we had moved downtown to what's now Blush, a boutique in downtown Seneca Falls. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version.
At any point over the life, especially in more recent years, obviously the pandemic kind of was a blur for everybody. But now that you've got some serious years under your belt with the business and growth and all the good things that come along with owning and operating, you like a couple pinch yourself moments along the way. It was like, holy cow, I can't believe this is what it's actually like rolled into.
Yeah, I actually have had many moments like that. And I mean, once you get into business, it's just kind of like you're in it. And there are times you go from survival mode to like thriving mode, but you don't really take a minute to be like, oh, okay. And actually, I was just saying to you off camera, we're just wrapping up tax time. And I feel like that's always a frustrating season, but also it's the time when I do kind of reflect and pinch myself a little bit and say like, we did what? And Seneca Falls, like we did this. This is great. So I have had some moments like that because, you know, we've grown, we've expanded our space 3 times. And, you know, we ship to 48 states and it's just been a crazy thing.
Yeah. So the impetus for this conversation was a few months of, actually, it was barely into holiday season, I guess, in retail world. I had gotten a couple requests from readers and listeners who wanted to go down the rabbit hole, or wanted us on the show to go down the rabbit hole of how do small businesses compete with corporations? Giant corporations, like, your store is a microscopic blip,
just a little baby
on the radar compared to corporations that for a million different reasons have it a lot easier to continue existing day to day, week to week, month, year, year. I want to tackle that question first. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but when you approach, how do you approach that question of how am I going to compete and sustain against Amazon? Against Walmart, against large corporations that may have a million different focuses, but are able to, because of their scale and size, compete with every niche shop under the sun.
Well, so our strategy has always kind of been, don't try to be Amazon, because you just can't, you know, but we are like, okay, what are the things that people love about Amazon? The convenience, you can order something and it's here tomorrow. So actually the fall prior to the pandemic, we started offering free local delivery within 15 miles, and we would do it within 24 hours. And so we had already kind of had that system in place when COVID came. So, so that was definitely helpful. But so we were trying to expedite our ship outs as well. And luckily, we use Shopify as our e-commerce. So they give you great discounts for the post office and UPS. So even like if we're shipping across the country, we can stay competitive with them. But so the other thing that we wanted to do is it's like, okay, what is that lacking? And try to hone in on that and say, okay, well, you can't DM Amazon and say, what size did you wear in that? How does that one fit? I mean, they do have some, fit details and things, but, it's like that personal touch. So we kind of try to maximize where we're different from them and then just try to stay as competitive as possible as far as pricing, shipping time, turnaround, all that.
So that's the practical answer. But the reason why I wanted to ask it that way is because how do you psychologically go through that day to day?
I'm in therapy. No.
Because, isn't that, that has to be, I would imagine, more stressful perhaps than the actual, execution of just, okay, we have a plan, and the plan for the most part works, and we're growing, and we're doing all the right things. But psychologically, the toll that it must take running a small business and watching larger companies just be able to play in a completely different space is.
And it's funny because where I get most frustrated is the way that people like to think of themselves. They like to think of themselves as, I want to support local. I want to support my community. I want people to get a fair wage. I want people to, and they have all these platitudes that they will share the memes all day, Josh. However, where they put their dollars don't necessarily align with those values because it's convenient and it's cheap. And I understand that. We live in an area, it's not an especially wealthy area, and money matters, right? But, I think that if people took a moment to kind of map that out and say, I do want to spend my hard-earned money with companies whose values might align with mine. And a lot of times the prices really aren't that different. It's just like this pattern and this habit that, again, COVID really kind of pounded that habit into all of us because nobody was leaving their house. And it was like, oh, I can get my groceries, my food, everything I need from one place. And, so it's interesting. And that's where psychologically I think it's frustrating. And, Amazon can mess up your order. And we keep saying Amazon. That's the big one, right? But there are others. They can mess up your order 15 times. You probably don't rant about it online. You're still going to go back. You get a bad pizza delivered and everyone on your social media knows about it. You will never go to that place again. So there's just these, kind of contradictions in, I think, the way that people want to see themselves and how they support the area that they live in and, what they do with these big corporations.
You're telling that story, or you're walking through that scenario, and all I can think of is a couple weeks ago when the news broke in Geneva that the movie theater was going to be closing. And I'm talking hundreds of comments and posts that I read over a span of like 3 or 4 days, people saying, I can't believe this is happening. There's nothing fun for kids and families to do anymore. Meanwhile, every person I've talked to who had gone to that theater in the last 6 months to a year, other than the 7 and 9 o'clock showings, were like, the theaters were basically empty. And it's interesting because like, does that just go back to the core idea that for the average consumer, because corporations have allowed people to like disassociate so much from the pragmatic reality of running a business, that it's so out of mind that they aren't even like vaguely thinking about like, oh, I wonder how does Christine staff her store versus what Walmart can do when staffing their store. Like,
I think it is because again, I made the joke about people will post the memes all day long because I think people do. People have good hearts. They want to do the right thing. But everybody's so freaking busy. Like, who has time to research that? Who has time to really like soul search about what the hourly wage is at a company, But I do think that, we are in a time where there are more conversations like this one, where people are finding out, they're getting a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain. And I think that it's a good opportunity for people to kind of, rethink what they are doing with their money, whether it be, where they're going with their families. I saw the same thing because as an entrepreneur, my heart went out to that theater because I'm like, I can't even believe they made it this far. It just, things have shifted so much. And it's people have to reframe their mind and to say, if I want good things where I'm living, I have to support the businesses that are already there. You are not going to attract a new business to a place where businesses are struggling. And I think that that's, where we are at in a lot of these small communities is because, the ones who are making it are not making it by these like gigantic margins. Things are tight. And, we live in the same world as our customers. So everything costs more for us too. I just told you we had a massive increase in sales last year. And yet the bottom line, my income went down significantly because things just cost more. And you have to it takes a lot, I'm sure there were some really hard moments for the people that had to make the decision on the movie theater, Freihoffers, all those things. But, I get it.
It's always interesting too, because like one of the first things that comes into my mind, and I look at this through the lens of the media landscape, right? Like I look at local media like Finger Lakes One, some other really small newspapers around upstate New York, up against, like Gannett, some of the bigger, Sinclair, the bigger broadcast, the corporations. And it's interesting because like you can look around and you can see operations that are being sustained on losses, annual repeated losses, like business models that have not been profitable for probably more than a decade. And yet they continue because at the end of the day, it's a write-off for a giant conglomerate that can play the tax game that we play here in this country. When you talk to other small business owners, like what is like if there was like one domino that could fall that could help level the playing field for small business owners up against these giant corporations, like what do you think, like, what do you hear as like one common theme that comes out of those conversations? There's probably a million different things that y'all complain about, but like, is there anything is there a common theme among all of them that it makes you feel like there could be like maybe some kind of change?
Well, your initial question pertaining to Amazon, that is a common theme. That I hear is, competing with the big, because it's not just like they have this fantastic marketplace and their stuff is so good that people just come to them. A lot of us small businesses market ourselves using social media. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but every probably third reel that I scroll by is an Amazon influencer.
Mhm.
They've also infiltrated these social media. Why wouldn't they? It's where the eyeballs are. But so it's like, shoot, okay, our reels were doing great. We were reaching this, we were getting in there, and now here comes Amazon, here comes Walmart, here comes. And so it's just, I think the biggest, I don't know what would be the domino. I mean, I am hopeful that with a little bit more of people's mindfulness on, seeing their areas not turn into ghost towns and die, that, there may be a wake up call before, more businesses close. And luckily, like here in Seneca Falls, for example, we've had a little bit of a shift in our downtown where it's kind of been a phase of like boomers are retiring and like some new younger people who haven't been beaten down by entrepreneurship have come in.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. And so there's like this little like, I wonder if this could be something. And so I'm actually on this committee that's kind of operating behind the scenes a little bit, but we're working with some different people to say like, okay, what funds or what things are going to happen that can maybe capitalize on this? What can get some momentum, real momentum going? And a lot of times that comes down to money. And so, I think that it's going to be a combination of entrepreneurs stepping up and risking it because it is a risk, but it can happen. And then the consumers, when they see those new businesses, when they see those people putting themselves out there with great products, support it when you can. Think that first rather than, oh, I got to order something, go to Amazon, be like, wait, can I run downtown? Can I order this on my phone and still have it delivered in the same amount of time, but that money stays here? Yeah. Things like that, I think, are going to be, in my mind, that's where the shift is going to happen.
You mentioned social media, and it's interesting because it seems like, there's different generations of business owners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned there being kind of a new wave in Seneca Falls,
mm-hmm.
And that's probably reflective of the whole region, right?
I think so.
But it's interesting because I still see a lot of resistance to it from a lot of business owners who have well-established
mm-hmm.
businesses and large customer bases, not corporate large, but like large for the region. When you think about how social has shifted this dynamic over the last decade, especially after the pandemic,
mm-hmm.
you mentioned the Amazon influencer,
mm-hmm.
but like outside of that, the ability to generate a sale
mm-hmm.
from a social media post.
Yeah.
10 years ago probably would have seemed a little strange. New concept then.
Mm-hmm.
Not a new concept anymore.
Right.
When you think about what that does, obviously that can have a positive to your business, right? Reaching a customer who's not within range of your store. Yeah. But at the same time, when you're talking about that community
mm-hmm.
that you're talking about restoring here locally,
mm-hmm.
I could also see a scenario where like your business is 80% online in another 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, the foot traffic in the door isn't necessarily as important.
Right.
Like, how do you approach that from a strategy standpoint? Because social media takes a lot of effort.
Yep.
Maybe, you do it really well. I think a lot of other businesses just kind of do it like 50% well, maybe half-assed it a little bit. But like at the same time, it's really viable, but do you ever worry about like alienating the really like local customer potential that's here through that process?
Yeah. So it's been a struggle we have such a broad demographic with my store because we're a boutique and the clothes, we have women who are in their teens that come in and get stuff for National Honor Society. And I have people my mom's age that come in and find things.
Yeah.
So it's really broad. And then we have our home stuff, which it can be anybody, any sex, anything. So, we kind of have diversified our social media platforms where, I'm kind of like I'll do things on Facebook and I'll kind of talk more to our local people, whereas I have our younger staff members doing more of the TikTok, Instagram stuff where it's reaching a broader, younger, our ideal, like when I think of our customer, what I'm visualizing, a 30-something still wants to be cute, all these things. That's who they're reaching. So, we try to do that. And I try to do things also. I mean, after COVID, I think everyone was a little bit hesitant to like go to events, but they wanted to. So I think we're kind of now to the point where when we've had some type of pop-up event or something at the store, people flood in. Like people are really, they want to go to a paint and sip night. We had like a permanent jewelry pop-up, which was really great. We'll just do like food events. I mean, people are like ready to go. So I think that that's where it's a really good way to stay connected with the local community. And that's one of the things that we're doing with the committee that I'm on. If I'm blowing up the spot, sorry guys. But the Music in the Park event has been going on for the last few summers in town. And last year really picked up a little bit of steam. So some local businesses were all kind of trying to do something that is create a little bit of synergy with those nights, like a Thirsty Thursdays or something, to kind of be like, hey guys, you don't have to go to Geneva. You don't have to go to Rochester this weekend. Like stop down. We're throwing some ideas around, but doing things to attract people maybe from neighboring communities, but also to people here to be like, hey, you don't have to leave to have a good time this weekend. Yeah. There is still a huge gap when it comes to activities with kids. And I think that that's somewhere that we really need to work on. But again, I think doing those things and giving people that call to action to not just hit the phone, but come down. People are they have a hunger for that right now. And it may go away. It may be temporary, but right now I feel like that's kind of the secret sauce for that.
Do you ever, when you're talking to, peers, other business owners, small business owners that are in kind of the selling something market, how often do you guys actually deal with frustration from customers that they couldn't get something, that something isn't available? Because I think when I think about the things that probably don't apply as much today as maybe they did when it comes to, smaller boutique stores or whatever the case may be, like that a decade ago versus now, it seems like that might be one of the things that's kind of like in the rearview mirror. Does it feel like that? Easier?
Yes and no. So we have an incredible selection. I think the only time where that happens is a size availability issue. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'll tell you a story of something that greatly impacted my small business last year, which partially is the reason for a partial loss on my end. So we have always carried clothes for, say, sizes small through large or extra large. And we just kept hearing, we need plus sizes. We need plus sizes. You don't have anything for plus sizes. And so it was like, okay. So I invested quite a lot last year into not only plus size clothing, but plus size swim. And I mean, if you think about what that takes, so when you get a jean order to get sizes 0 through 24, where you're getting 2 of each item, you're spending about $800 a pack. I mean, for one style of jean, which again, to a big company, it's like, oh yeah,
drop in the bucket.
But for a small business, and you're like, okay, if we want to sell jeans, we have to have 5 styles. We have to, so it can be difficult. And I have to tell you, none of the people who asked for them made a purchase. And I would say at least half of it got donated after about 8 months in the store. And not only like the same items were like, okay, well, now we're in a new season. Let's try it for fall. And again, it fell flat. So, those are things that we're still kind of trying to figure out. This year, we've started to bring in some extended sizes again. And so far, a little better than last year. But we don't have the same offering as we did last year because I can't like, I'm not in business to just make it look pretty. I want to see people enjoy these products. And so that's what's hard. And I don't know if it's because people know us. They don't want us to know they're plus. Like, it's a strange thing. I used to be in plus sizes, so I had my own weird shame around some of it where it's like, oh, I don't want her to know what size I wear, all of that. So I'm not sure what it is because the demand is there, but for some reason, I think people would rather anonymously shop online.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you mentioned that because one of the unique retail stories I saw during the holiday season were some astute shoppers identifying things that retailers had attempted to sell the year prior, unsuccessful, held it for a year, marked it down over the summer, marked it back up into the winter.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's interesting because like a small business would never have the capacity to go through that long, arduous process.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Like where would you store it, first of all?
Yeah.
When you think about that kind of scenario and the scenario you just outlined, like what's your message then to people in the community who may hear that and be like, oh man, I don't want Christine to be feeling that way. And if I knew I would, how do you, because obviously on one hand, you could have just been like, I'm just not doing this.
Right.
The heck with it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, but at the same time, there's part of you obviously that wants to keep trying.
Fill the need. Yeah.
So what's the balance or how do you approach the balance then going into like future years?
Well, I don't know if you know this about me, but I don't like failure. So that has been sticking in my mind. So I told you we just kind of tried again a little bit, and we're just really trying to focus. I mean, the store in general, we have a diverse group of us working there, body-wise, age-wise, all those things. And we've always kind of said, like, our mission is to help you feel great in your clothes. And so I had to kind of look and say, okay, that was, maybe we overextended, but I still know in my gut that need is there. And so I still want to fill it. And so we kind of restructured our approach to not necessarily pushing so much that it's like plus size, but like Jenna is now doing some modeling. It's more of like an inclusive thing rather than like isolating that as like some little niche and just saying like, but so I would say to someone that if they are kind of struggling with that, where it's like, there's a need and you think you can fill it and you just don't know what to do, is I guess make sure that it really aligns with your mission and the values of your company. Because I mean, if I didn't think it fit into what we're trying to do, I would just be like, cut our losses. I'm done. I'm not doing this again. Like, I mean, I've had people come in and go, do you have something against fat people? Like, we've taken abuse on this topic.
Yeah.
So I would just say, forget it. But I mean, in this case, I do feel like there is a place for it and there's a desire for it. So, we're trying again and just maybe taking smaller risks rather than a big swing off the bat.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine how challenging of a like math equation that is in your head just because of like that's where the corporation has the ultimate advantage, right? Because they can just stock everything because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And if it doesn't sell, good. We need to offset those profits anyway.
That's so you've mentioned staffing quite a few times now. And the more people I talk to around the whole region who have visited your store, not just recently, but over the long haul, how helpful, consistent, same faces.
Yep.
Those themes, they are repeated when it comes to
that's good to hear.
Positives that are sitting for your store. Obviously, you've found a process on the talent side that works for you. How do you approach that? Like, what is your pitch to other business owners who, might be struggling with that? Might be, maybe a lot of turnover, maybe, a lot of different things that are going on there. The things people say about wages on social media, for example. There's so many different factors involved in that, like retention conversation.
Yeah.
How do you approach it?
Well, it is multifaceted. I mean, we've been very lucky in that all of the people that are working for me have come to me. I didn't like do a job posting and find them that way. It was organic, but it's a couple things. I mean, I do believe in if you want to have a quality employee, you have to pay them a quality wage. And let me put a little asterisk to that, because one of my biggest pet peeves with politicians is that they harp on paying that fair wage. But do you know how many notices I've gotten that our payroll taxes have gone up in the last year? Mm-hmm. It's bananas. It can be challenging. And there are days when I'm like, oh my God, why? But then I see the quality of my employees and I'm like, okay, this is why. So fair wage is not just fair. An attractive wage is important if you want to retain a good person. But also, I mean, one of my big things is I just don't believe in saying like, here's your job duties. This is what we're doing. Here's our target for the month. It's more like creating a vision of what I want to do. Like, I want to reach these people. I want to ship to all 50 states this year, and kind of painting a picture of something where like her goals, Jenna's goals fit inside it too. Or, Jordan's doing what she wants, and kind of making it more collaborative with them. And, I use Jenna because she was just promoted to our manager. I mean, she's excited to work there. Like, she's excited because she's hitting some of her personal goals. And so I think it's just making it an attractive thing and having either a mission or something that the people that are working for you, they're not just coming in and punching a clock. They can actually like take pride in what they're doing and feel like they're not just spinning their wheels. So I know that maybe sounds like fluffy and whatever, but it's worked for us so far.
Yeah. The turnover portion is so interesting to me, because it seems like when small businesses from the outside, when small businesses get really stifled, is when the owner or managers or whoever the case may be are spending an inordinate amount of their time training over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Jenna's been with you for years.
Mm-hmm.
How important is that in terms of not just like, you talked about some of the culture impact of that,
mm-hmm.
but also your ability to perform on the sales side.
Yeah.
Really hinges on having at least a few of those players who are like long-term,
yes,
dedicated players to the team, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, since I opened, my mom has been with me as well. So she's like the OG. And we had another woman working with us for a while. And so she was there, and I felt that feeling of when she left of like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't do all these new things that I'm working on and all of that. Like, I had total freak out. And so I realized that it's not just the consistency of your staff. I think having good systems in place is so important. And I think a lot of businesses, particularly ones who have been in business for a long time, they've kind of got these like old school accounting methods and old school inventory. And I mean, that was fine when we were doing, low six figures. But as you grow and see those staff changes, you're like, oh no, I need to be able to replicate this fast. I need to. So I think having, strong systems in place. And also, if you have multiple staff members, make sure that everybody kind of knows the job, so that if someone new comes in, I don't have to personally train them. I can, delegate a little bit to our manager and say, I'm going to have you do this, this, and this, and check in. But, that delegating and being able to have, them kind of take that over is helpful, because for too long I was working only inside the business and I wasn't zooming out and looking at the big picture. And someone who's further along in business pointed that out to me, and it was like, oh yeah, that's why we're kind of staying pretty steady. And once I was able to delegate a little bit and let go of the reins, which isn't easy all the time, but that was definitely helpful too.
And it's thinking about scale, right? Because
Yes.
in the early days, while again, going back to the theme of this conversation, a corporation has an entire division of the company that's dedicated to logistics and scale and all the things that are going on with having a giant footprint. A small business, when you're low six figures, maybe not even six figures, versus fast forward 10 years and you're many multipliers above that. Having the systems in place is one thing, but you almost have to be thinking about that day years before you're actually getting to that point when it comes to the operational stuff. When did you start to, like, when you think back in your journey, like how far into the process were you when you started to think about, oh, if this scales too much, we're going to have a problem?
Yeah. I'm ashamed to say, I think I was 6 years in. And it was during COVID.
Oh, it was during COVID. It wasn't before COVID.
Yeah. Oh, we just changed everything during COVID. We're like, you know what? We're doing it all now. So I mean, we were pretty far in. And it's funny because it kind of brought, when you use the word scalable, I've been having a conversation with myself lately about, okay, what do I do about this? Because one of the things that our current customer base loves, and it brings in consistent orders every week. People come in every week. It's like our biggest, if I don't do it, we see a dip, is my personal try-ons. So I will do, we've been, I don't know how we've been able to do this, but we've been doing weekly clothing drops because the turnover rate is still very good. So we do a drop of different styles every week, and I do the try-ons, describe the fit. People have like come to know me, what my body is. If I'm in a medium, this means they're in a small, whatever. And lately, though, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I have kind of created this beast that how is this scalable? How can I keep this going long term? What if we do want to have a second location or do something? So, it's a struggle because that is the personal touch that we have added that is a little bit of an edge. But so I think there's just always going to be that struggle, and I haven't found the answer to that yet. When I figure it out, I will let you know. But I think it's always going to be the balance of, how do you scale and how do you get to a place that you want to be, but, still stay that small, intimate business.
When you think about the future of your business, and most people listening or watching are going to view your business differently. Already quite far along in this process and very successful at that. When you think about like what the next is, like, how do you do that? Because to your point that you just made, scaling yourself is very difficult. It's hard.
I can't.
It's hard to scale oneself. Like, and that's the challenge, right? Like, short of becoming something morphing into something that's much larger.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? Like, when you think about the next 5 to 10 years, like what do you think about?
Well, when I think about that, I take myself back a few years to when I couldn't even visualize where we are now. And I think about the fact that I have attracted this staff that has the same, her mission aligns with mine. I know that if I step out of the store, that our customers are receiving the same service as if I was there. And so while I can't replicate myself, I am very, I don't want to use the word strict, but I am very emphatic with them about this is the level of service. This is what the store needs to look like. Like the clothes need to be looking like this. So it's more putting a strong culture into place and instilling that into who's our manager now, because I feel like this has been a great experiment and that I can do that. And I have full faith in Jenna. And so if I can do that, I believe I can do that again. And so if we do grow, I think if someone walked into Canandaigua and there was a blush store there, they would know exactly what they're going to get. And I think that that's how the majority of, these corporations got started. nobody started out as Amazon. It was a process. And so, it's again a question of how big do we want to get, or do we want to stay that small thing with that personal service? And I do think it's really important to just have consistency with your staff so that people know exactly what they're going to get when they come in.
We're already seeing corporations deploy artificial intelligence in various ways.
Yes.
And we're so early in the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine that we're going to see more of it from the big retailers.
Yes.
When you think about what kind of opportunity that creates, not only having access to some of the tools that will inevitably be available to small businesses, but also the personal touch opportunity that exists for small businesses. More optimistic or pessimistic about how it will ultimately impact?
I'm about 50-50.
Really?
Part of it scares the heck out of me, just as an individual.
Right.
And I just don't know. I see like these little temperature checks on it with people. And I think a lot of people feel the way that I do, or they're very polarized on it. Like they are just so against it, or they're like, let's do it. You know what? We've been, embracing technology. This is just the next piece. So I do think, I think that as humans, we're not evolving as fast as technology. And so I think that there is still going to be a great swath of the population that is going to crave authenticity, personal interactions. And there's going to be a segment too that's like, no, give me the headset. Like I'll do everything from home. I'm fine. So I think it's going to be up to the business to see where you fit in that. And I think probably a lot of us will do what you said, whereas, maybe we'll use some of the tools that Shopify's put into place or whatever, because you don't want to fall behind. But I think it's just going to be a question of not trying to appease both and kind of find where you fit in that.
Has your social media feed become just chock full of AI generated everything?
Yes.
Even a lot of ads I've noticed like in the last few months for all sorts of like brands across the board.
Yeah.
And I think of like what you mentioned earlier with having to compete with the quote unquote Amazon influencer. Now you're also, I guess, having to compete with AI for placement on some of these things and creativity, I guess, as well.
Well, and it's funny though, because I always think to myself too, do these places just have huge ad budgets and so I just keep seeing it? Or are people really engaging and looking for this? Because just because that content is there doesn't necessarily mean that that's what people want, right? It could just be that these places that are doing the advertising have these massive budgets. So again, I think it really just does come down to trying to know your customer and who you're trying to reach, because you're never going to be for everyone unless you're Amazon. But you know what I mean? And so I think it's just honing in and getting the people who follow you to love you and embrace you and just feel like, damn it, I have to support them, and just doing that, because otherwise if you try to get everyone, it's very difficult. I
am so glad you said it that way, because so often when I see some ads, especially on Instagram and Facebook, it almost feels like they're just, these larger corporations are just spamming the entire world and like no engagement, like, 2 comments for a Walmart ad.
Their
and it's
conversion
like,
rate could be terrible.
How?
We don't know.
How is this even possible? Like, is it just that they're just throwing everything up against the wall and just trying to cover the whole market?
Right.
Or is it like there's actually something? It's very, very, very interesting. Successes and failures. I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
In the context of your experience as an entrepreneur, when you think about your biggest success and your biggest failure, and I don't mean like the worst loss you ever took or anything like that. I mean like the one thing that stuck with you the longest.
Okay.
Or maybe served as the best learning moment. What was that in context of living in this world where you have to compete with constantly rising wages, inflation, battling against corporations, staying in business and being successful and having all those personal connections that you've been talking about? Like, was there a failure along the way that like has served as a really good guiding light for you? And then maybe like a high point also.
Yeah. I mean, the quick answer for the high point, the success, is that we have survived all of those things and are still here. The inflation, the craziness, all of that. I mean, it is astonishing and it takes its toll for sure. I've had so many moments, particularly recently, where I'm like, why? Why do I do this? But failure, one of the biggest lessons, and luckily I didn't go too far down this path, but I think I compromised our authenticity a little bit. And this was kind of during, just before COVID, during the Trump presidency, everything was very politicized. Cancel culture was like at its peak.
Yeah.
Everybody was an activist. And I think for a minute, it was observing like when companies started putting their values and their stated values out there. And I kind of like did a little bit of that, thinking like, oh, we need to do this. Like people need to know where we are politically and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it just didn't feel good when we were doing it. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that we didn't like go hard in the paint on that, because I think that's backfired for a lot of people. And not that I mean, you know me, I'm pretty open book and I'll talk about anything, but I think one of the biggest mistakes I made, and not just about politically, but I think is losing that authenticity a little bit, because I think people's BS meters are pretty keen now. And I mean, you can make a pretty bad misstep by just following the herd. And I think it's more, it's stronger. Like I say, don't try to make everybody love you. Make the people who follow you love you. And the people who don't, I mean, they're not going to like you anyway. So it doesn't matter. Just focus on the people who like you, make them love you. And I think that was the biggest lesson from it is, stop trying to get everybody to love you, because they're not going to anyway.
It's a lesson in content creation right there.
Yeah.
And when you think about, you mentioned following the herd, I see a lot of folks when they're in the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey, they look to the corporations, they look to the big players in the pond and say, I want to do it like them.
Yeah.
I got to do it like them. That sounds pretty contrary to everything you've described to me over the last hour. Am I reading that wrong?
Well, it's kind of a balance, because you need to know.
Yeah.
But one interesting thing is, if you are looking at what a big corporation is doing right now, that was their plans from 2 years ago that are being executed right now. So you're 2 years behind. So, I mean, you have to kind of be in the know. But I feel like if you're always looking out, you're not innovating. You're not finding your edge. And again, I think that's the only way to compete. Because again, if you're just going to shadow Amazon, they're probably going to do it better, and probably for 5 cents less, which means a lot to people, believe it or not. So I think I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Last question here for you. I want to end on a positive note, real positive note.
Yeah.
What's one encouraging piece of advice you would give to any budding entrepreneur who's listening, or maybe has some doubt in their mind about whether they should pursue that passion or that dream of theirs because they're looking at the corporation saying, I can't freaking compete with that.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's not really great business advice. It's more life coach. I think life is short. And I mean, if you are someone who wants to live for the weekends and collect a paycheck and not really feel like you need to make your mark or make a small little difference in your corner of the world, then entrepreneurship might not be for you. You might be a great entrepreneur inside another good company. But if you want a challenge and enjoy the ups and downs and, kind of having the necessity of proving to yourself over and over again of what you can do. It's it's very rewarding. And I mean, I've met some amazing people. I've had so many, connections that I wouldn't have had outside of this. And I do feel it's very exciting to see something that you're doing impact people's lives in a positive way in a world where we're all kind of lost in the in the fray. It is keeping that personal touch, and I think we need people doing it. So if you're thinking about it, take the leap.